culture was on the rise. The Vikings of Northern Europe developed a disturbing method of sacrifice called the blood eagle. By 900 AD, most of Europe was a collection of Christian kingdoms. Only the far north, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, remained pagan. And only there did people still practice human sacrifice. It is the year 965. And here on the northern shores of Europe, the Dark Ages are about to get darker. This is a sacrifice to the gods of the Vikings.
What most people don't realize about European human sacrifice is that it was still taking place in the 10th and 11th centuries.
The people known as the Vikings made Scandinavia their home. They were a warrior culture, valuing strength, power, and bloodthirsty courage. They believed in multiple gods. Thor, the savage god of storms. Freya, the goddess who gathered dead Viking warriors from battlefields. And Odin, the king of gods, who demanded tribute from his worshippers in the form of human blood from captured warriors.
It seems in the Viking period that most sacrifices were offered to Odin as chief of the gods.
As the god of warfare, Odin demanded blood for battlefield success. And to flatter the god, the Vikings performed a human sacrifice called the blood eagle.
The actual process of the blood eagle it is rather disturbing. You took your live victim. It said you carved the shape of an eagle on his back.
To add to the horror, salt water is sprayed in the victim's face and nostrils to keep the victim alive and conscious through the entire gruesome process. The more pain the victims felt, the happier Odin was said to be. Based on artwork and ancient texts, experts believe the process was to cut open the victim's back to reveal the spine.
And then you cut the ribs from each side of his spine and you splayed them out, pulling them out of the back so they formed a pair of sort of wings like this.
In the final act of the ritual, ancient writers said the victim's lungs are pulled out to look like actual wings. It's an unlikely and bizarre story. So bizarre that some experts doubt the very existence of the blood eagle ritual. Is there any truth to the legend? Is the bloody practice even possible?
I have with me here now a very large iron dagger of the type Vikings might have used. It's not only very sharp, it's big. Anything smaller may not have gotten the job done. I'm going to slice down to the soft tissues of the back, trying to avoid any large vessels or piercing the organs, and get down to the ribs. You can hear some of those ribs cracking there. I'm going to pull some of the soft tissue back. I need to get at those lungs. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to see if I can break the ribs. I really don't think they could have survived this. There's another big problem with this. The legend says that they open the back and pull the lungs out to look like big wings, big bloody wings. The problem is, once you pierce this chest wall cavity, you'd hear an inflush of air, and the lungs would collapse, just like a balloon whose air had been released. Instead of being a nice, big, fluffy, billowy lung that looks like a wing, you'd have something around the size of a tennis ball. So for this reason, I don't think that this was the method that brought about the legend we're speaking about.
But there is another possibility. and another gruesome experiment in human anatomy may reveal the secret of the blood eagle.
I think there's another way that this legend could have come about. The scapula, or shoulder blade, is also known as the wing bone. It's a large, flat bone that basically floats on the back of the chest. So, if we were to take our dagger and cut the soft tissues this way, releasing all of these muscles that come from the back, we're not disturbing the lungs at all. We're cutting the muscles, the trapezius muscles, just to release the shoulder blade from the back. Now, with all of these muscles released from the back side of the scapula, I can pull the scapula back, and look at that. Big, bloody wing. If I do the same thing to the other side, this definitely could have been what the legend was all about. For the victim, unfortunately, it is possible that he could be alive while they're making these cuts for at least a matter of minutes.
Vikings believed the blood eagle appeased the god Odin, preventing defeat in raids and combat. Victims were offered after a victory as a special thanks to the bloodthirsty god of battle. But that was only one method of Viking sacrifice, and the stories of other forms it took struck terror into the hearts of all Europe. One of the most dramatic Viking rituals involved strangling, stabbing, and fire. The human sacrifice ritual called the Blood Eagle was once considered a legend, but it turns out to have been real. However, much of what people think they know about Vikings is actually a myth. They didn't drink from their enemies' skulls. They didn't burn every village they raided. And even the famous horned helmets of the Vikings seems to be a fantasy. But one Viking legend turns out to be true. The Viking funeral. Eyewitnesses report burning dragon ships that carry the corpse of a dead warrior. But rarely mentioned, Viking funerals often involved a human sacrifice. An Arab traveler named Ibn Fadlan spent time living with a Viking tribe in the year 921 AD and reported this strange ritual.
A Viking nobleman was buried with great pomp and ceremony in celebrations that went on for several days. And the central focus of that is the killing after several days of his slave girl.
The funeral begins with the Viking leader's ship pulled aground. His body is placed on it, surrounded by gifts. Overseeing the funeral is an elderly priestess the Vikings call the Angel of Death. For 10 days, the Viking crew feasts and drinks. One slave girl is chosen to accompany the chieftain into the afterlife. She is plied with alcohol as she serves the Viking crew in every way, even sexually. On the 10th day, the Angel of Death calls for the victim to take her place at her dead master's side. She knows her fate as she removes her jewelry and gives it to the Angel of Death. Then, at a signal, the Vikings strangle the girl. Her last sight is the Angel of Death raising a sacred dagger and plunging it into her heart to end her struggles. The slave girl's corpse is laid next to the Viking chief. Then the entire longboat, filled with its gifts, its treasure, and its cargo of corpses, is set on fire. Unlike the myth, the ship burns on land, not on the sea. The Vikings believe if the ship burns quickly, the gods are appeased, and the chief and his slave are welcomed into Valhalla. It is one of the last human sacrifices to take place in Europe. Within decades of this 10th century funeral, Viking tribes converted to Christianity. Blood was no longer spilled to satisfy the war god. The religion of Odin was replaced by the religion of the Bible. But the Bible itself is filled with sacrifice. Animal sacrifice is found through